Welcome back to Hardball. President Trump has issued the first veto of his presidency. It came just one day after the Republican-controlled Senate delivered an embarrassing rebuke of this president on his signature issue, passing a resolution they did to terminate his national emergency declaration at the southern border.
I will be signing and issuing a formal veto of this reckless resolution, and that's what it was. And I have to, in particular, thank the Republican, strong, wonderful people, the Republican senators that were on our side and on the side of border security. They were very courageous yesterday, and I appreciate that very much. Congress's vote to deny the crisis on the southern border is a vote against reality. Today, I am vetoing this resolution. Congress has the freedom to pass this resolution, and I have the duty to veto it.
Well, a dozen Republican senators crossed party lines to vote with the Democrats on the measure blocking the national emergency declaration. The New York Times reports the president may have found Congress's breaking point here, noting the mere act of defying Mr. Trump foreshadows potential new difficulty for the president as he seeks to push his agenda through a Democrat-controlled House and a less pliant Republican-controlled Senate. The House, by the way, will vote to override President Trump's veto later this month, although it's expected to fall short of the necessary two-thirds majority to override. For more, I'm joined by David Jolly, a former Republican congressman from Florida, who's no longer affiliated with the party, formerly known as a Republican, and Jason Johnson, politics editor for the... I got to start with you, formerly Mr. Republican. Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. Are Republicans falling out of line finally? Is this a one-off or the beginning of something big?
I think it's more of a one-off. Chris, at the end of the day, I don't think the political issue will be over this question of executive authority. Much like during the immigration debates over President Obama's executive orders, at the end of the day, your voters in 2020 want to know where you are on policy. And I think a lot of these Republicans that may have stepped out of line, if you will still be running on Donald Trump's border security agenda, still on building the wall. I think the bigger issue here, the bigger vulnerability for the president himself, is today writes into law under his signature with this veto that, in fact, he lied to his supporters and the American people about Mexico paying for it. I think that's the message that hits the president where it hurts. This debate over executive authority, while historically exceedingly important, is not likely to be a political issue in 2020.
Can I challenge you on that? Do you think any voter, knowing that there's nationalism, we call it patriotism on our side of the border, we call it nationalism on their side, that any voter honestly thinks that the Mexican government would survive a day if they built a giant wall keeping their people in the way that the East Germans and the Russians did back in the Cold War? Build a wall to keep your people from leaving the country. What, you really think Republican voters are that dumb that they believe such a thing?
I think Trump has cultivated, listen, I think Trump has cultivated such loyalists. He has defined the issue for the voters, and the voters have accepted it. And at the end of the day, look, if the president's running on border security and Democrats or soft Republicans are saying we're not there with the president on border security, I don't know who wins that debate in 2020, to be honest, Chris.
But I'm going to go back to my point and rub it in a little bit. You got elected by Republicans for a while there, and you think they're as soft-headed, as naive, to buy that another country will accept our majesty, the Goliath of the North, and bow to us and say, oh, yes, master, we will build a wall and pay for it so that you'll be happy that none of our people get into your country. That's insane.
Look, you're breaking down the Trump coalition here. I would say you've got 60 or 70% are Trump loyalists.
But Chris, what put Trump over the line? Dumb, but
what put Trump over the line are not the people that believe that. You're exactly right. It's what I call the for-profit Republicans that held their nose and stuck with him because they knew he'd put green dollars in their back pockets. Right. But at the end of the day, the base is the base, and yes, I think they believe Donald Trump.
Yeah, let me think. What do you think, Jason? Let's talk about today. The Republicans have been adamantly with this guy. 88% late polling, 9 out of 10 Republican voters like this guy. And they stick with him as doing a good job.
Right. Look, the Republican base is going to stick with him because their explanation for everything, whenever Trump fails policy-wise, it's always Congress's fault. They believe in him. They believe in his principles. They just think that he's surrounded by a bunch of weaklings who aren't as committed to his agenda. What I see with this, it's not just that this is a one-off. If you think of the main principles of the Trump campaign in 2016, it was getting rid of Obamacare and building that wall. He's failed twice. These are the two biggest things that he promised. He failed to get rid of Obamacare when he had a complete control of the House and the Senate. Now he can't get the wall done.
I'm a little more romantic than either of you. Let me just try this by you, Jason, first. I grew up with watching boxing every Friday night. We loved boxing. It was always Marciano, and it was everybody. Sugar Ray Robinson, it was everybody. And then it was, of course, our hero came along, Muhammad Ali. But to get to Muhammad Ali, he had to beat a guy who was unbeatable.
Yes.
Sonny Liston. Yes. No, but prisoner, frightening guy. People, it's like Mr. T imagery. Absolutely frightening guy. Nobody can beat him until he couldn't beat anybody.
Right.
Is there going to be a point where Trump can't win anymore? He's lost 2 in a row now on Yemen and on the Declaration. That's a bad week for him. He's got 3 defeats this year, right? Big defeats.
Yes.
So you think you don't see coming here a crack in this wall?
Well, the crack in the wall isn't with his base. The crack in the wall is with the Republicans in the House and the Senate. They learned in 2018 that Trump is not as much of a magical elixir when you're running for re-election as they thought he was going to be.
Yeah.
That's what allowed them to make some of the principled decisions that you saw this year. I can win in Ohio again, and I don't have to have Trump. I can win in this particular state, and I don't have to have Trump support. That's what really happened. But legislatively, look, this is a process thing, not a principle thing. They're all in favor of border security. They just don't want a wall.
I don't see any victories. David, it doesn't, you root for a president. Don't you have to have some victories? I mean, he's losing on North Korea. Looks like a joke. He meets in Hanoi. By the way, he didn't go to Vietnam the first time. He went this time, and he made a fool of himself this time. And you got to wonder. You got to wonder, don't they say, I want to see some white smoke go up, some hope? There's no sign of victory from this guy anymore.
Well, and I think, Chris, what today teaches us, it's not that the Republicans are breaking rank. I really don't think that's going to be the case. But it forecasts a weakened hand of the President of the United States. Just take the Democratic-controlled House, for instance. Any of the president's legislative success now has to happen with the blessing of Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats. How likely is it that the president will be able to point to any success between now and next November working with Capitol Hill? I think the answer to that's going to be no. The president could reach next November in a very weakened state. I think that's the lesson from this week. Well, the goose
eggs, as we say in sports, add up, my friends. They add up. That's right. And at some point, you become a loser. Thank you, David Jolly. Thank you, Jason Johnson. Up next, 2020 presidential candidate Corey